Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on when you've decided to watch this presentation. My name is Andrea Sjaardema, and I'm here to discuss with you the alarming increase of suicides of the EMS provider. And hopefully, we'll show you ways on how you can help a loved one, or a family member, or a coworker, and hopefully be able to decrease this number that has starting to risen lately. But before I get started though, I'd like to introduce myself and give you a reason as to why I would like to do this presentation and why this subject is very important to me. First, as I said earlier, my name is Andrea Sjaardema. I'm a full-time paramedic. I work for a very busy 911 system in northern Indiana. I initially started my career as an EMT basic up in Wisconsin. I got my education through Gateway Technical College as an EMT basic. I started to work for a local fire department that did fire and rescue. I went on to get my EMT I-99 education, as well as firefighter, and finally paramedic. I worked for the fire department as a paid on-call, part-time and volunteer firefighter paramedic. I did that for several years before moving back to my home state of Indiana. Once I moved there, I started working for a private ambulance company and worked in the heart of Gary, Indiana for the majority of my time. I now work for a busy 911 system, as I mentioned earlier, in northern Indiana. I work for a third city service, so we are the EMS that provides all of the 911 response to the entire county with only 6 ambulances. We work alongside the fire department and the police department on all these calls. I have worked in very poor inner city areas, I have worked in very rural areas, and everything in between. Right now where I work, we can have an inner city call 2 minutes from the hospital, and the next call can be 30 minutes from the hospital. So you have to be able to adjust your treatment plan for each patient on how you're going to treat them and the amount of time that you have with them. Right now, where I work, and previously, I have somehow gotten the nickname of being the Black Cloud. Being a black cloud in EMS generally means that if there's going to be a bad call, a horrible call, a once-in-a-million time call, it will happen to me. I have had major traumatic events. I have had crazy medical calls that have a million things going on with that patient. So I have seen a lot of bad things, dealt with a lot of bad calls, bad situations, and then also have been involved in a lot of really good calls that had really good outcomes. Unfortunately, being the Black Cloud, I have also gotten to know our local flight EMS helicopter service as well, as we cover many miles of major interstates in our area. So, as you can see, for me, any day, any time at work can involve any types of calls. Now that I have introduced myself, I would like to explain to you why I picked this sobering topic for a presentation. Well, I have lost 2 very good friends of mine who were EMTs. They are both partners of mine, and I knew them very well. Unfortunately, they both committed suicide. Both are very shocking stories, and both have affected me in my life as well to this day. First off, my partner, Daryl. He was my very first partner at the private ambulance company that I worked with. Him and I spent 13 hours a day, sitting only 3 or 4 feet apart from each other in the front of an ambulance. We sat in various parking lots throughout northwest Indiana. Now, being that you sit only a few feet away from your partner, you have to learn to get along with them, or you are going to have a very miserable shift. I enjoy getting to know people, and my goal is to get along with pretty much everybody I work with. So Daryl and I were able to get along and got to know each other. Now, being that you are that close to each other, you get involved unintentionally with your partner's lives. You hear every side of the phone conversations that they get from their loved ones, their significant others, their friends. You get to meet their friends and loved ones who come to visit and say hi. So after a while, you begin to notice their habits, their ways of doing things, the way they feel, the way they're going to act when they come to work in the morning, being that you're with them all the time. Daryl was in his mid-20s. He was engaged to his girlfriend while I had been working with him. They had bought a house together, a house that needed a lot of work as it was a foreclosure. He was also in the middle of paramedic school. They had gotten a dog together and had moved into this house. So he had a lot of stuff going on outside of work and inside of work. On top of working full-time, he was going to school full-time as a paramedic, and that also involved a lot of stress. After a few months of living together in the house, they started planning for their wedding. Now, Daryl, on many occasions, has told me that he has a temper. He has learned how to deal with it, he said, and was getting better at it. Very rarely did I see that side of Daryl, except for a few calls here and there when we'd have difficult patients or difficult family members of the patients we had. The last few weeks I worked with Daryl, I started realizing and noticing a shift in his behavior, his personality, and the way he acted during those 13 hours. A lot of the phone calls he started getting were not very nice phone calls. He was arguing a lot with the person on the other end, and just overall being a lot more moody. He started to argue a little bit more with patients at work. He became moody with me in the ambulance. He just was not his normal self. He was usually a big talker, talked my ear off for 13 hours a day, and suddenly he started to become very quiet. The last few shifts that I worked with him, it never really got better, but I didn't myself feel the need to ask him really anything because I didn't want to pry into his personal life. I figured he had things under control and was doing okay with it, and it wasn't my place to question him or see if he needed any help. The last shift I worked with Daryl, I was very sick with a severe respiratory infection. I was sicker than a dog, I felt miserable, had a fever, and it was a very long 13 hours. On top of me being sick, Daryl was also very crabby and hardly talked the entire shift. I came home from that shift and called in sick to work for the next day because I was feeling so horrible. That morning when Daryl got to work and saw that I wasn't there, he texted me and stated, "I'm sorry for the way I've been acting. I hope that's not a reason why you didn't come to work today. I promise I'll try to do better and be happier." I texted him back and said, "It was no big deal. Everything's fine. I know you're under a lot of stress with the wedding and paramedic school and all of that. So it's no big deal. The reason I called off was because I was very sick." Well, that was the last text and communication I had from Daryl. A day later, I got a text message and a phone call from a friend of mine who also worked there. He told me that I no longer had a partner and that Daryl had died and that he had shot himself in the head the previous night. You can imagine my shock. I had just talked to him. I had just asked him, he said things were doing better and he was doing fine and that I'd see him the next time I went back to work the following week. So to find out that now he was dead was a complete shocker, and it really made me think back to how he had been acting and what he had been doing, and made me wonder what I could have done to help him. The story was that he came home late from a bar one night and his fiancée was home when he got home. They apparently got into an argument, his temper flared up, and he shot himself in the head right in front of her. Very shocking, very scary, and just an overall bad thing to happen to everybody involved. Now, this was in March of 2012. After that happened, I had a lot of people asking me, since I was his partner, how he had been behaving, how he had been acting, and asking me why I didn't do anything about it. Well, you can imagine that kind of increased my guilt factor a little bit. Now, it can be argued that he was doing fine, that this argument with his fiancée triggered his temper, that none of this was premeditated, and that he didn't have any future plans of wanting to kill himself, harm himself, or anything due to all the stress. But that's a question that will never be asked or answered because he's dead and he's gone and we can't replay anything that happened. Now, after Daryl died, I needed another partner. So after going through many different partners as fill-ins, partners who didn't know what they were doing, didn't know where they were driving, I finally got a partner named Dana. Dana had actually requested to be my partner because she was in the middle of paramedic school and wanted to get a lot of experience as I was a black cloud. Dana and I started getting to know each other very well. We had fun. Typical women, you talk a lot during those 13 hours. And we realized that we had a lot in common and started hanging out with each other after work. Well, a few months later, I come to work and Dana's not there. Dana usually comes to work early, has the rig ready to go, and if she's not going to be there, she calls me and lets me know. I didn't hear anything from her. I had known she was having a lot of problems at home with a boyfriend and other relationships, along with going to paramedic school and all the stresses that involved. Well, I called her, texted her, and she never got back to me. That day, my supervisor called me and said that Dana had overdosed on a lot of medications, had left a suicide note, but that she had called 911 and gotten the help she needed as soon as they got there. She was in the ICU on a ventilator, but was going to be okay. A few weeks later, she came back to work, and things got back to normal. She told me she had things under control, she had people to talk to, she had a therapy plan, she knew how to deal with things going on in her life. Well, a few months later, I got a new job with the company that I'm with right now. Her and I kept in touch, but after a while, she kind of dropped off the grid. Eventually, we got back in touch in December of 2013. She told me things were good, she had moved back with her boyfriend, everything was A-okay. She had gotten a new job that wasn't on the ambulance and was a lot less stressful. She texted me on New Year's Day and stated she thanked me for being such a good friend and for always being there for her and never giving up on her, and she wanted to thank me for that. I texted her back and said, no problem, feel free to call me anytime you need me, and that was it. That was the last text message I got from Dana. She ended up committing suicide by overdosing on cardiac meds she had, and they found her in her car the next day. I got a phone call from another friend of mine that stated that this is what happened. So now I have lost two partners, two friends of mine, all who were EMS providers, which is why I want to do this presentation and to give everyone a little heads up as to what actually goes on in the EMS world, what we do as a career, and if you're a family member, a coworker, or a friend of someone in the EMS world, that maybe if you see some red flags going on, that you can help that person and that we can maybe decrease this high incident of suicides of the EMS provider. Now that you know why I want to give this presentation, I'm going to give you a few main points of what you're going to hear and hopefully what you'll learn. First is I'm going to give you a description of what a career in EMS actually entails. That it's not like you see on ER, on TV, or in the movies. Second, I'm going to explain the current state of mind of EMS providers as perceived by the public and also fellow coworkers, and that this needs to change. Third, I'm going to review the signs and symptoms that you need to look for in a loved one, a coworker, or a friend if you start seeing abnormal behaviors in that person. Fourth, I'm going to give you some statistics that were quite shocking to me when I did the research for this presentation. Statistics of numbers that shocked me beyond belief. And finally, I'm going to give you ways to get information to help your loved one, your coworker, or a friend. In case they need it. So first, what is it like being an EMT, a paramedic, or a firefighter? Well, you work long hours, you lose a lot of sleep, you don't eat right, you go on a lot of stressful calls, and then after that 24-hour shift, you come home and you have to be with family, and you have to act normally, and you got to get all the stuff you need to get done in 2 days, to go back to work, to do it all over again, and to lose your sleep. Now granted, we do this job because we love it, we do it because we want to help people, and we do it because it's in our blood. It's what we want to do. We chose this job. But there are 5 things unique to being an EMS provider as opposed to the general public. First off, there is a high level of uncertainty. You go to work and you don't know what you're going to see, what you're going to experience, who you're going to meet, what patients you're going to have. the general public can go to work and have a general idea of what they're going to do and what their day is going to entail. Being an EMS, you have absolutely no idea. I have days where I go to work and I go on a few calls, they're basic, no big deal, and I get through the shift and actually get a couple hours of sleep. Then there's days I go to work and I have critical calls, traumatic calls, back-to-back, full arrests, and halfway through the shift I'm crying because the day is not even halfway done and I've dealt with all this stuff that has mentally drained me. Second, when the alarm goes off, there's an actual physiological response that your body has to do in order to respond to this call. And usually it's while you're sleeping. When you're asleep, you're resting, your heart rate's lower, your blood pressure's lower, and you're relaxed. When that alarm goes off, you suddenly wake up, your heart rate increases, your blood pressure increases, adrenaline gets released, your blood sugar level goes up, and all of this happens within a few seconds. Then you go on the call, you have to suddenly wake up, figure out what's going on, think about what you're going to do, come back, do the report, and go back to bed. And then your body may not even be done recovering from that call when you get a second one. So your body never gets to go back to a general state of rest and relaxation that most people do when they're home sleeping. Third, there's always a potential for interpersonal tension. When you're on a call with someone, you have to be able to communicate in order to get things done in a properly time frame. Crises can arise when there's miscommunication, so the stress increases when things are going on a call that you can't control and you're needing to get things done to save a person's life. And fourth, the exposure to human tragedy is significant. We see things on a daily basis that most people will ever see in a lifetime. So we have to be able to process that and deal with it and move on to the next call. And finally, there's always the underlying fear factor. You don't know what you're going to see. It may be a subconscious fear factor, even if you've been a veteran for 20 to 30 years. You don't know what kind of call you're going to get. You're not going to know if you're going to get that call that's going to affect your life that day. So on top of these 5 stressors that are unique to EMS, we have to be away from family for 24 hours, lose a lot of sleep, come home, have to make a presentation after 24 hours of being up, and function daily. So all of this can make things hard for the EMS provider to deal with. So, how can we help the EMS responders, the EMS workers, our loved ones, and our coworkers when they are having a hard time dealing with all this kinds of stress? Well, there's red flags we need to look for. We need to look for certain signs and symptoms of an abnormal behavior so that we can get the help for them that we need. We also need to be compassionate and know that their job requires a lot of extra stress and a lot of extra mental and physical and emotional energy that a lot of other jobs don't do. One of the red flags to look for is how they're behaving at home. Are they being more tired? Are they having a lack of concentration? Are they being more irritable? Are they not eating right? Are they not sleeping good? Are they being more aggressive towards their patients at work if you're a coworker? Are their relationships at home being affected? All of this can be red flags to trigger wanting to get the help for them. These are the things I saw in my partners at work, but I never took the time to investigate, to talk to them, to see if they needed help. The other thing to remember is we are all human. Everybody in EMS is human. We all feel the same emotions that everybody else feels. We all have to deal with the emotions, deal with the craziness that we see every day, just like everybody else in the world. We just have to be able to do it in a faster paced world. We have to deal with our call, move on to the next one. So having the compassion for that, for your loved one, and listening to them, and being willing to talk to them at home is one way that you can help them deal with it and process what they're seeing. Look for signs of burnout as well. Have they talked about not wanting to do their job anymore or switching careers? PTSD is a major issue as well with EMS workers. It doesn't just occur on the battlefield. And finally, now that you know what to look for, some quick statistics about EMS suicides. Current studies have found that the annual fatality rate for paramedics was 12.7 per 100,000 people, whereas the normal average for the American population was only 5.0 per 100,000 people. That is a significant number of suicides. That's over doubled the general American public who commit suicide. The Chicago Fire Department in 2009 had 7 suicides in an 18-month period, which was a ridiculously high rate. So, what do we need to do for our loved ones and our coworkers? We need to get them the help that they need. We need to let them know that it's okay to talk to someone. We need to change the idea that EMS workers are strong and that they are weak if they ask for help. It needs to be flipped around. We need to let it be out there and known that only a strong person asks for help. The strong person knows that they need the help to overcome what they're going through, so that they don't want to harm themselves or harm any other people in their life. One of the ways we can get our loved ones to talk to someone if they don't want to talk to us is by calling a hotline. If you have a piece of paper, write this down. It's the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. It's 1-800-273-8255. Or they can go to the suicidepreventionlifeline.org website. Being there for your loved one, your coworker, and your family is one of the best things you can do. I have a very supportive family. They let me talk, they let me vent, and they show me the support that I need. So, now that you've seen what it's like to be an EMT and the stressors that are involved, please look at your loved one, your coworker, and your family members in a different light, and show them that they can get the help that they need, so that maybe we can decrease the amount of suicides in the EMS world. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you listening and look forward to any feedback. Have a great day.